Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Discovery and watched the massive space station grow larger on the main screen. Kepler Station looked like a giant metal flower with 12 petals stretching out into the darkness of space. Each petal belonged to a different alien race that made up the Centauri Alliance. Jake had studied the files about these aliens for months, but seeing their home in space made everything feel real. Chief Science Officer Lisa Carter walked up beside him and pointed at the screen. The station was bigger than any human city. Ships of strange shapes moved around it like metal fish swimming through space. Some ships looked like long needles made of crystal. Others appeared to be balls of gas held together by energy fields. A few resembled living creatures with wings made of metal. Security Chief Ryan Walsh checked his weapon one more time. The humans had been invited to join the Centauri Alliance, but everyone knew this was really a test. If the aliens liked what they saw, humans might become the 13th member of the most powerful group in the galaxy. If they did not like humans, the Earth would remain alone among the stars. Communications Officer Nina Brooks received the docking instructions from the station. The alien voice that spoke to her sounded like music, mixed with the sound of breaking glass. Nina had learned 12 different alien languages for this mission, but hearing them spoken by real aliens still made her nervous. She guided the Discovery toward the docking bay that had been prepared for them. Ambassador Helen Pierce straightened her uniform and looked at her team. She had spent her whole life preparing for this moment. Humans had only learned to travel faster than light 50 years ago. Most alien races had been flying between stars for thousands of years. The Centauri had built their first starship before humans learned to make fire. The ethereals had been traveling through space when Earth was still covered in ice. The docking bay doors opened and the Discovery flew inside. Jake could see aliens watching from observation windows. Some of them looked like tall, thin people, with blue skin and 4 arms. Others appeared to be made of living crystal that changed colors as they moved. A group of beings that looked like floating clouds of gas pressed against one window to get a better look at the human ship. When the Discovery landed, Jake led his team through the airlock and into the station. The first thing he noticed was the smell. The air had been mixed to keep all the different alien races alive, but it smelled like flowers mixed with metal and something that reminded him of the ocean. The gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth, normal, which made walking feel strange. A group of aliens waited to greet them in the main hall. The leader was a Centauri named High Arbiter Zix Thala. She stood 8 feet tall with pale blue skin and large black eyes that seemed to look right through Jake. Her forearms moved in patterns that Lisa had told him meant formal greeting in Centauri culture. When she spoke, her voice sounded like a computer that had learned to talk. Standing beside the High Arbiter was a creature that looked like it was made of living diamond. This was a Vorthak representative. The crystal being did not speak with words, but instead made musical sounds that the translation device turned into speech. Near them floated a cloud of green gas that Jake knew was an ethereal. The gas moved in slow circles and spoke through changes in color and density. Other aliens stood behind these 3. Jake recognized a few species from his studies. The Mindari looked almost human except for their completely white eyes and the way they seemed to know what he was thinking before he thought it. The Keth were covered in thick fur and stood on 4 legs like horses, but had hands like humans. Several other species that Jake had never seen before watched from the edges of the group. High Arbiter Zix Thala began to speak about the history of the Centauri Alliance. She explained that only the most advanced races could join their group. Each member species had to prove they could contribute something valuable to the Alliance. She looked at the humans with what might have been doubt in her large black eyes. The crystal Vorthak made sounds that translated as questions about human technology. How fast could human ships travel? How much energy could human weapons produce? How many planets did humans control? When Ambassador Pierce gave the answers, Jake could see disappointment in the way the aliens moved. Human ships were slow compared to alien vessels. Human weapons were weak. Humans lived on only one world while most alien races controlled dozens of planets. The ethereal gas cloud asked about human mental abilities. Could humans process information as fast as Centauri computers? Could humans read minds like the Mindari? Could humans change their shape like the flow beings from the outer rim? Again, Ambassador Pierce had to give answers that seemed to disappoint the aliens. As the formal greetings continued, Jake began to understand that the aliens saw humans as children who had barely learned to walk among the stars. They were being polite because they had agreed to consider humans for membership, but none of them expected much from this new species. The real test had not even begun yet, and the humans were already failing. The next morning, High Arbiter Zix Thala led the human team through long corridors to the testing chambers. The walls of the station seemed to be alive with moving patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. Nina Brooks tried to read the symbols, but they changed too fast for her translation device to keep up. The aliens moved through these halls like they owned them, which Jake supposed they did. The first testing chamber was a huge room filled with floating screens and glowing mathematical symbols. Engineer Matt Collins stepped forward when Zix Thala explained this was the logic trial. The symbols on the screens showed equations that stretched across 17 different dimensions. Matt had studied advanced mathematics at the Earth Space Academy, but this was beyond anything humans had ever seen. The Zentari who administered the test spoke in rapid bursts of sound that the translator struggled to follow. Matt was supposed to solve the equation by finding the pattern that connected all 17 dimensions. Every other species that had attempted this trial used pure mathematical calculation. The smartest Zentari could solve it in 3 hours. Most other species took days or simply gave up. Matt stared at the floating symbols for several minutes. The numbers and shapes moved in complex patterns that seemed to follow no rules he understood. Instead of trying to calculate each part separately, he stepped back and looked at the whole pattern. Something about the way the symbols moved reminded him of water flowing down a river. He began to touch the symbols not in mathematical order but in the order that felt right. The Zentari observers made sounds of confusion as Matt arranged the symbols in patterns that made no mathematical sense. He was following something that felt like instinct rather than logic. When he connected the final symbols, the entire equation collapsed into a simple answer that appeared in the center of the room. The testing chamber filled with silence. Zix Thala checked her instruments 3 times before admitting that Matt had solved the puzzle correctly. She seemed disturbed that he had found the answer without showing any mathematical work. The way he solved the problem violated everything the Zentari understood about logic and reason. Matt tried to explain that he had seen a pattern in the movement, but his words only confused the aliens more. The second testing chamber felt different from the first. The air here was thick and warm, like a summer day before a storm. Medical officer Amy Foster entered the empathy trial chamber where creatures from dozens of worlds waited in separate containers. Each creature was suffering in some way, but their emotions were completely alien to human understanding. The Mindari test administrator floated above the floor with her white eyes closed in concentration. She explained through telepathic contact that Amy needed to comfort each creature using only her natural empathy. No translation devices were allowed. No reference materials could be used. Amy had to understand and soothe beings whose emotional structures were nothing like human feelings. Amy approached the first container, which held something that looked like a plant made of blue fire. The creature was making sounds like wind through broken glass. The Mindari had told her this being was experiencing the alien equivalent of grief, but Amy had no idea how to comfort a plant made of energy. She placed her hand on the container and began to hum softly. The sound she made had no words, but somehow it matched the rhythm of the creature's distress. Slowly, the blue fire plant began to change color, and its sounds became less harsh. Amy moved to the next container, which held a creature that looked like liquid metal with eyes. This being was afraid, but its fear felt different from human terror. Amy spoke to it in gentle tones and made slow, careful movements until the metal creature stopped shaking. Container after container, Amy found ways to connect with beings that should have been impossible to understand. She used sounds and movements and something that came from deep inside her to reach across the gap between species. The Mindari observers watched in amazement as creatures that had been suffering for hours began to calm under Amy's care. The third testing chamber was the most dangerous. Survival specialist Carlos Bennett entered a room where the environment changed every few minutes. The air shifted from oxygen to methane, to substances that would kill most life forms instantly. The temperature swung from freezing cold to burning heat. The gravity changed from normal to crushing weight to zero. Carlos had trained for survival in hostile environments, but this chamber was designed to be impossible. No single species could survive all the different conditions that cycled through the room. The test was meant to prove that some challenges could not be overcome no matter how skilled or determined someone might be. When the atmosphere changed to methane, Carlos quickly built a simple breathing filter from materials in his survival pack. When the temperature dropped to freezing, he used chemical heat packs and wrapped himself in reflective material. When the gravity increased to 10 times normal, he lay flat and controlled his breathing to avoid passing out. The aliens watching from outside the chamber expected Carlos to die within the first few cycles. Instead, they saw him adapt to each new challenge using tools and techniques that seemed to come from nowhere. When the chamber filled with acidic gas, Carlos sealed himself inside a protective shelter made from his own equipment. When electrical energy began arcing through the air, he grounded himself using metal strips from his gear. Hour after hour, Carlos survived conditions that would have killed any member of the species watching him. He did not just endure the changing environment, but seemed to understand it. He anticipated changes and prepared for them. He used creative solutions that the test designers had never considered. When the trial finally ended, Carlos emerged tired but alive. The 3 humans had completed trials that were meant to be impossible. Matt had solved the logic puzzle without using logic. Amy had shown empathy for creatures that should have been beyond understanding. Carlos had survived an environment designed to kill anything that entered it. The alien observers gathered in groups and spoke in worried tones about what they had seen. High Arbiter Zix Thala announced that the humans had passed the first round of testing, but her voice carried doubt and concern. The aliens had expected the humans to fail quickly and quietly. Instead, they had succeeded in ways that challenged everything the Centauri Alliance understood about intelligence and ability and survival. Dr. Peter Kane spent the night studying the test results in his temporary laboratory aboard the Discovery. The data from the 3 trials made no sense according to everything humans knew about alien psychology. Each species in the Centauri Alliance had evolved to be perfect at one specific type of thinking, but completely limited in other areas. The Centauri could process mathematical information faster than any computer humans had ever built, but they could not create anything truly new. Their minds worked like perfect machines that could solve any problem as long as someone else had solved a similar problem before. They excelled at logic but failed completely when imagination was required. The Mindari could read emotions and thoughts across species barriers that should have been impossible to cross. They understood feelings so deeply they could heal mental wounds just by touching them. But when different emotions conflicted with each other, the Mindari became paralyzed with confusion. They could not make decisions when empathy pointed in multiple directions. The crystal Vorthak could manipulate matter at the level of individual atoms. They could reshape metal like clay and turn gas into solid matter with just their thoughts. Their control over the physical world was absolute within their range of influence. But they could not adapt when unexpected changes occurred. Their perfection became a prison when situations demanded flexibility. Peter realized that every alien species was like a master craftsman who had spent thousands of years perfecting one skill while forgetting how to do anything else. The ethereals could exist as pure energy, but could not understand physical matter. The Keth were perfect warriors but terrible at solving problems that could not be fought. Each species had traded versatility for excellence in one narrow area. Captain Tony Miller and Intelligence Officer Grace Lee were investigating the Alliance database using access permissions that Ambassador Pierce had negotiated. The official history spoke of great achievements and peaceful cooperation between species, but deeper files told a different story. Every few hundred years, something terrible happened that nearly destroyed the entire Alliance. The records called these events the Great Convergences. Strange forces would appear from empty space and begin consuming entire star systems. These entities seemed to target the most advanced civilizations first. They would study each species and find ways to turn their greatest strengths into weaknesses. Logic-based species would be trapped by unsolvable paradoxes. Empathic species would be overwhelmed by artificial emotions. Physical manipulators would find their powers turned against them. Grace found references to previous solutions that had saved the Alliance from destruction. The records describe these solutions as miraculous breakthroughs that came from nowhere, mathematical formulas that solved impossible problems, emotional strategies that unified conflicting feelings, physical techniques that worked despite violating known laws of science. But the records never explained where these solutions had come from or how they had been discovered. Cultural specialist Kevin Stone was observing daily life aboard Kepler Station and noticing patterns that troubled him. The different alien species worked together efficiently, but they never truly collaborated. Each group handled the tasks they were best at while avoiding anything outside their specialty. The Zentari ran the computer systems, but never involved themselves in emotional disputes. The Mindari handled psychological problems but stayed away from technical challenges. Kevin watched human crew members moving through the station and saw something completely different. When Matt Collins encountered a broken translator device, he did not just call for a Zentari technician. Instead, he combined mathematical analysis with intuitive guesswork and emotional understanding of what the user needed. He fixed the device using methods that no single alien species would have considered. When Amy Foster met with distressed alien civilians, she did not rely only on empathy. She used logical analysis to understand their problems and physical techniques to help them feel better. She combined approaches that the specialized aliens kept completely separate. The results were more effective than pure empathy alone could have achieved. The aliens began conducting secret scans of the human crew members. Dr. Peter Kane discovered the scanning equipment when he found energy readings in areas where humans spent time. The scans were designed to measure brain activity and psychological patterns. When Peter confronted High Arbiter Zix Thala about the unauthorized scanning, she admitted that the Alliance was trying to understand how humans thought. The scan results showed that human brains worked differently from any known alien species. Where alien minds showed intense activity in specialized regions, human brains displayed moderate activity across multiple areas simultaneously. Humans were not exceptional in any single category, but they maintained abilities in all categories at the same time. Zix Thala explained that this pattern was unprecedented in Alliance experience. Every other species had evolved toward specialization because it provided clear advantages in survival and technology. Specialists could outperform generalists in direct competition. A Zentari would always outcalculate a human. A Mindari would always show greater empathy. A Vorthak would always demonstrate superior physical manipulation. But the test results suggested that humans could combine these abilities in ways that created unexpected results. Matt had solved the logic puzzle by using intuition along with mathematics. Amy had shown empathy by combining emotional understanding with logical analysis and physical comfort. Carlos had survived the impossible environment by mixing knowledge and instinct and creativity in rapid succession. The aliens were conducting these studies because they were frightened by what they had observed. Humans represented something that did not fit into their understanding of how intelligence worked. The Alliance had been built on the idea that each species contributed their greatest strength while other species handled different challenges. Humans seemed capable of handling multiple types of challenges simultaneously, even if they could not excel at any single challenge. Peter Kane realized that the aliens were not just studying humans out of curiosity. They were trying to determine whether humans represented a threat to the existing order of the Alliance. If humans could do everything moderately well, they might not need the specialized abilities that made each alien species valuable. The possibility that humans could make the Alliance system obsolete was causing fear throughout the station. As word of the human test results spread through Kepler Station, the mood began to change. Some aliens became more interested in working with humans while others grew distant and suspicious. The unity that had held the Alliance together for thousands of years was beginning to show cracks as different species considered what the arrival of humans might mean for their own future. Among the stars, the emergency alarms that screamed through Kepler Station sounded like nothing Jake Morrison had ever heard before. The noise seemed designed to reach every type of alien hearing at once, creating a terrible harmony that made his bones ache. Red, Lights flashed in patterns that hurt human eyes while alien crew members responded with panic that needed no translation. Communications Officer Danny Rogers was monitoring long-range sensors when the first warnings came through. Something massive was moving toward their section of the galaxy at impossible speed. The sensor readings made no sense because the approaching objects seemed to exist and not exist at the same time. They appeared on gravitational detectors but not on visual scanners. Energy readings showed them as both burning hot and freezing, cold simultaneously. High Arbiter Zix Thala called for an emergency assembly in the main council chamber. Representatives from all 12 Alliance species gathered around a holographic display that showed the approaching threat. The images were difficult to look at because they seemed to shift and change whenever someone tried to focus on them. These were the Devourers, and they were heading straight for the heart of Alliance space. The ethereal representatives spoke first through their color-shifting communication method. They explained that the Devourers appeared in galactic history every few thousand years, like a natural disaster that could not be predicted or prevented. The entities consumed entire star systems by converting matter and energy into something that could not be measured or understood. Whole civilizations vanished without leaving any trace that they had ever existed. Centauri analysis computers worked frantically to calculate defensive possibilities. The mathematical models were run thousands of times, but every scenario ended the same way. The combined military forces of the Alliance had no chance against the approaching entities. Weapons that could destroy planets had no effect on beings that existed partially outside normal space and time. Shields that could stop any known energy simply did not register the Devourers as something to block. The Crystal Vorthak attempted to demonstrate their matter manipulation abilities on samples of Devourer material that had been collected after previous encounters. Their powers, which could reshape any normal substance, had no effect on the strange matter. It was as if the Devourer material existed in a different universe, where the normal rules of physics did not apply. Mindari telepaths tried to make contact with the approaching entities to understand their intentions or find some way to communicate. The attempt left several Mindari unconscious and others speaking in languages that did not belong to any known species. The emotional feedback from touching Devourer minds was so alien that it damaged the Mindari ability to think clearly. Engineer Samantha Bell studied the technical data about previous Devourer encounters, while her human colleagues tried to find some pattern or weakness that the aliens had missed. The historical records showed that Devourers always approached the same way and always achieved total victory. They would study each defending species for a brief time, then develop specific attacks that turned each species' greatest strength into a fatal weakness. Centauri logic was defeated by paradoxes that had no solution. Mindari empathy was overwhelmed by artificial emotions that caused madness. Vorthak matter manipulation was reversed so that they destroyed themselves while trying to reshape Devourer substances. Each species was neutralized using their own abilities against them. The Alliance Military Command began preparing evacuation plans to abandon entire sectors of space. Fleet Commander Veltaran announced that civilian populations would be moved to the outer rim of the galaxy, while military forces attempted to delay the Devourers. Everyone understood this was not a plan for victory, but a desperate attempt to save some survivors from total extinction. Several Alliance species began making secret preparations to flee beyond the galaxy entirely. Long-range ships were loaded with cultural archives and genetic samples in hopes that their civilizations might survive somewhere in the void between galaxies. Other species considered surrendering immediately in hopes that the Devourers might spare those who offered no resistance. The unity that had held the Alliance together for thousands of years crumbled as each species reverted to their own survival strategies. The Centauri retreated into mathematical calculations that offered no real solutions. The Mindari withdrew into emotional isolation to protect themselves from further psychic damage. The Vorthak began building matter barriers that everyone knew would be useless against the approaching threat. Lieutenant Chris Parker was monitoring communications between Alliance ships when he noticed something that none of the aliens seemed to understand. The different species were not actually working together to solve the crisis. Each group was attempting to handle the problem using only their own specialized abilities. The Centauri were calculating alone. The Mindari were feeling alone. The Vorthak were building alone. Ambassador Helen Pierce tried to offer human assistance in the defensive preparations but was politely dismissed by the Alliance leadership. They explained that human technology was too primitive to contribute meaningfully against an enemy that had defeated civilizations far more advanced than Earth. Human weapons and ships and knowledge were simply not adequate for the scale of the threat they faced. Dr. Rachel Scott realized that the aliens were making the same mistake they had always made when facing the Devourers. They were approaching an unprecedented threat, using the same specialized thinking that had defined their species for millions of years. Each group was trying to find a perfect solution within their area of expertise, instead of considering approaches that crossed the boundaries between different types of thinking. The Devourers were now close enough that their influence could be detected throughout Alliance space. Stars began flickering as reality itself became unstable near the approaching entities. Time moved differently in some areas, causing communication delays that made coordination even more difficult. The laws of physics became unreliable, making it impossible to predict how any defensive technology might function. Captain Linda Martinez gathered the human crew to discuss what they could do in the face of seemingly certain defeat. The aliens had made it clear that human contributions were not welcome or needed. But Linda could see that the specialized thinking that made each alien species powerful was also preventing them from finding solutions that required cooperation between different approaches. The humans had been dismissed as too primitive to matter in this crisis, but Linda wondered if their lack of specialization might actually be an advantage. While each alien species was trapped within their own way of thinking, humans could potentially understand and combine all the different approaches. The secret strength that only humans possessed might be exactly what was needed to survive the approaching darkness. Lieutenant Chris Parker had been studying the Alliance defensive plans for hours when he made the observation that changed everything. He found Captain Linda Martinez on the bridge of their makeshift command ship and spread out the tactical displays that showed how each alien species was preparing to fight the Devourers. The patterns he pointed out should have been obvious, but somehow all the brilliant alien minds had missed them completely. Each species was planning to use their greatest strength against the approaching enemy, just as they had done in every previous encounter with the Devourers. The Centauri were building computational weapons that relied on pure mathematical logic. The Mindari were preparing empathic defenses based on emotional manipulation. The Vorthak were constructing matter barriers using their molecular control abilities. Every approach was exactly what the Devourers would expect. Chris explained that the historical records showed this same pattern in every previous defeat. The aliens always fought using their specialized abilities, which made them predictable to an enemy that had been studying galactic civilizations for millions of years. The Devourers had learned to counter every form of specialized thinking by turning each species' strength into a weapon against them. Dr. Rachel Scott joined the discussion and added her analysis of the Alliance psychology. She had been observing how the different species interacted during the crisis and noticed that they were completely unable to think outside their evolutionary specializations. When Centauri faced a problem, they could only consider logical solutions. When Mindari encountered difficulties, they could only respond with empathic approaches. The boundaries between different types of thinking had become absolute walls. Rachel proposed something that made the other humans stop and stare. What if the solution required combining approaches that the aliens considered impossible to mix? Logic and emotion used together instead of separately. Order and chaos applied simultaneously instead of in sequence. Individual excellence in group. Cooperation employed at the same time instead of choosing one or the other. Engineer Jordan Taylor began working out how such combinations might actually function in practice. The Centauri computational weapons could provide precise targeting information, while Mindari empathic abilities coordinated the timing of attacks. Vorthak matter manipulation could modify weapons and defenses in real time, while ethereal energy, consciousness provided power distribution across the fleet. Each element would enhance the others instead of operating independently. The problem was that no single alien species could think in more than one mode simultaneously. Their minds had evolved to excel in one area by excluding all other approaches. A Centauri trying to use empathy would lose their logical abilities. A Mindari attempting mathematical analysis would become emotionally confused. The specialized thinking that made each species powerful also made them unable to synthesize different approaches. Admiral Frank Davis realized that humans might be the only beings in the galaxy capable of coordinating such a complex combination. Human minds worked differently because they had never specialized completely in any single area. Humans could think logically and emotionally and physically and intuitively all at the same time, even if they were not as good as aliens in any individual category. The challenge was convincing the Alliance leadership to attempt a strategy that violated everything they understood about effective thinking. When Admiral Davis presented the human proposal to the Emergency Council, the alien representatives reacted with confusion and dismissal. High Arbiter Zix Thala stated that mixing contradictory approaches would create chaos rather than strength. The Mindari representative agreed that combining logic with emotion would paralyze decision-making rather than improve it. The Vorthak insisted that their matter manipulation required focused attention that would be destroyed by attempts to coordinate with other abilities. The Ethereals declared that consciousness linking could not function properly while distracted by physical concerns. Meanwhile, the Devourers continued their approach and began demonstrating the abilities that had made them unstoppable throughout galactic history. They attacked outer defense stations using the exact counters that previous encounters had shown them. Zentari computational defenses were overloaded with logical paradoxes. Mindari empathic barriers were shattered by impossible emotional contradictions. Vorthak matter weapons turned against themselves when the Devourers reversed their molecular controls. As traditional defenses failed one by one, the mood in the Alliance Command Center became desperate. Fleet casualties mounted rapidly, as each defending force discovered that their weapons and tactics were worse than useless against an enemy that had learned to turn every strength into a weakness. The evacuation plans that had seemed pessimistic now appeared optimistic. Captain Linda Martinez made a decision that would either save the Alliance or destroy any hope of human membership in the galactic community. She ordered the human ships to move into position to coordinate the combined defense strategy regardless of whether the aliens approved. If the traditional approaches continued to fail, the Alliance would be destroyed anyway, so there was nothing to lose by trying something unprecedented. Communications Officer Nina Brooks began establishing contact with representatives from each Alliance species and explaining how their abilities could work together instead of separately. She had to overcome not just language barriers but conceptual barriers, as species tried to understand how they could cooperate with approaches that seemed to contradict their nature. The breakthrough came when the Devourers launched their main assault and the traditional defenses collapsed completely. Facing total defeat, the Alliance commanders agreed to attempt the human coordination strategy as a final desperate measure. They had no understanding of how it might work, but their own methods had proven completely inadequate. Pilot Alex Thompson took position in a modified fighter that had been equipped with communication links to all the participating species. His job was to fly in patterns that would coordinate the timing and placement of combined attacks. He had to think like a Zentari to calculate precise trajectories while feeling like a Mindari, to sense the flow of battle while responding like a Vorthak to modify his ship in real time. The first coordinated attack mixed Zentari precision with Mindari intuition and Vorthak flexibility in ways that created completely unexpected results. Weapons that should have been countered by Devourer defenses instead found gaps that pure logic or pure emotion or pure matter manipulation could never have discovered. For the first time in galactic history, the Devourers encountered something they had not seen before. Engineer Jordan Taylor worked frantically to modify Alliance weapons by combining technologies that had never been designed to work together. Zentari computational systems guided Mindari empathic amplifiers, while Vorthak matter shapers created new weapon configurations in real time. The resulting devices violated the design principles of every participating species, but somehow functioned better than any pure technology. The Devourers began to show confusion, as their ancient strategies failed against approaches they had never encountered. Their ability to turn specialized thinking against itself became useless when faced with thinking that refused to remain specialized. The battle that should have ended in minutes stretched into hours as the combined Alliance forces achieved impossible successes. The final battle against the Devourers became something that no one in the galaxy had ever imagined possible. Pilot Alex Thompson flew his modified fighter through impossible maneuvers that combined Zentari mathematical precision with Mindari emotional intuition and Vorthak matter manipulation. His flight path looked random to observers, but created perfect opportunities for the coordinated Alliance forces to strike at Devourer weak points that pure logic or pure empathy could never have found. Engineer Jordan Taylor worked from the command center coordinating weapon modifications that violated every known principle of technology design. Zentari computers calculated target solutions, while Mindari telepaths sensed the emotional resonance of Devourer entities, and Vorthak matter shapers rebuilt weapons in real time to exploit newly discovered vulnerabilities. The resulting attacks used approaches that had never been combined before in galactic history. The Devourers, who had conquered countless civilizations by exploiting rigid specialized thinking, found themselves facing something completely unprecedented. Their ancient strategies for turning logic against itself failed because the attacks included emotional components that logic alone could not counter. Their methods for overwhelming empathy with impossible feelings failed because logical analysis provided structure that pure emotion lacked. Commander Jake Morrison coordinated the human crews who served as bridges between alien species that had never successfully worked together before. Humans translated not just languages but entire ways of thinking, allowing Zentari precision to guide Mindari sensitivity, while Vorthak flexibility adapted to ethereal energy patterns. The resulting cooperation created tactical possibilities that no single species could have achieved alone. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rachel Scott realized that the Devourers themselves were trapped by their own form of specialization. They had become perfect at exploiting the rigid thinking patterns of galactic civilizations, but they could not adapt to the chaotic creativity that emerged when those patterns were broken down and recombined. Their perfection at countering specialized approaches made them vulnerable to approaches that refused to remain specialized. Captain Linda Martinez led a coordinated assault that used every Alliance ability simultaneously instead of sequentially. Zentari calculations predicted Devourer movement, while Mindari empathy guided the timing of attacks, and Vorthak matter control modified weapons during flight, and ethereal consciousness linked the entire fleet into a single coordinated entity. The result was a form of warfare that had never existed before. The Devourers began to retreat for the first time in galactic history. Their ancient entities that had consumed entire star systems found themselves confused and damaged by attacks they could not predict or counter. The rigid patterns that had made them unstoppable for millions of years became limitations when faced with thinking that combined contradictory approaches in real time. Engineer Samantha Bell monitored the Devourer retreat and discovered something remarkable in the sensor data. The entities were not just leaving Alliance space but actually dissolving as they encountered the combined attacks. Their existence depended on the predictable, specialized thinking of their victims. When that predictability disappeared, the Devourers lost the ability to maintain their own coherence. The final Devourer entity was destroyed when pilot Alex Thompson led a combined assault that used all Alliance abilities in a pattern that changed faster than the entity could adapt. Zentari logic provided the mathematical framework, while Mindari empathy supplied emotional guidance, and Vorthak matter manipulation created new attack forms, and ethereal energy consciousness powered the entire effort. The Devourer simply came apart when faced with an approach it could not understand or counter. In the aftermath of the battle, High Arbiter Zixathala made a statement that shocked every member of the Alliance. She admitted that the Zentari and all other Alliance species had been wrong about the nature of intelligence and strength. Specialization, which had seemed like the highest form of evolution, was actually a limitation that made civilizations vulnerable to threats that required creative adaptation. The secret strength that only humans possessed was synthesis. While every other species in the galaxy had evolved toward perfection in narrow areas, humans had remained generalists who could combine and balance contradictory approaches. This apparent weakness was actually the greatest strength possible in a universe where rigid thinking led to stagnation and eventual extinction. Ambassador Helen Pierce was offered not just membership in the Alliance, but leadership of a new interspecies, council designed around human principles of cooperation and adaptive thinking. The Alliance had learned that their survival depended on breaking down the barriers between different types of thinking, and humans were the only species capable of coordinating such complex cooperation. The story concluded with human officers, working throughout Alliance space, serving as bridges between species who had never been able to truly cooperate before. Captain Jake Morrison established training programs that taught aliens how to think beyond their specializations. Dr. Peter Kane researched ways to help alien minds become more flexible without losing their unique strengths. Communications Officer Nina Brooks developed new translation methods that could bridge not just language differences, but conceptual differences between species with completely different approaches to thinking. Engineer Matt Collins designed technologies that combined the best elements from multiple alien sciences in ways that no single species could have achieved. The humans realized that their apparent weakness of being decent at many things rather than perfect at one thing was actually their greatest strength in a universe where rigid thinking led to inevitable defeat. The secret strength that only humans possessed was the ability to be imperfectly excellent at everything, rather than perfectly excellent at just one thing. Years later, when new species applied to join the Alliance, the first requirement was not specialization, but flexibility. The ability to think in multiple ways simultaneously became more valued than perfection in any single area. The human approach to problem-solving spread throughout the galaxy, as species learned that true strength came from synthesis rather than specialization. The Devourers never returned because they could not exist in a galaxy where civilizations had learned to think beyond the rigid patterns that had made them vulnerable. The universe became a place where cooperation between different approaches created possibilities that pure specialization could never achieve. Humanity had given the galaxy its greatest gift by showing that being good at everything was better than being perfect at anything.